Well, it's 12:08 and I am having an absolute mare. If you joined me at 12 o'clock for this scheduled live event, oh man, the scheduling ruins me every time. I am assuming right now, fingers and everything else crossed, that I am speaking to you on either Facebook Live or YouTube Live. Those were my plans. Whether or not that's actually been the case, I don't know. Anyway, let's not chat about this, it's boring. I am here today to help you answer what might seem like a blindingly obvious, incredibly simple question. What is a garden room anyway? However, if you're a person like me with a lot of questions, or if you've been researching this topic or trying to shop for a garden room, you might have decided for yourself that it's actually not such a simple question after all. It can be pretty complicated. So today, I'm going to undo some of that complication. I'm going to help you see what a garden room is and really importantly, what a garden room isn't. Because accurate expectations are the key to satisfaction. Simple as that. If you know what you're getting and you're happy with what you've paid for it, you'll be a happy customer. If you don't know what you're getting and it turns out that you don't feel like you got value for what you paid for, you'll be an unhappy customer. It's that simple, that straightforward. So I've got some bits and pieces to show you today. Hopefully, as always, this is all going to work. I'll click the right buttons in the right order at the right time. And well, after a wee while, I'll see if that's worked or not. So far, like Facebook lets me down, but YouTube saves my back, or sometimes Facebook's good and YouTube's not. It's all a bit complicated. But as far as I'm aware, I am live on both YouTube and Facebook at the moment. Thank you for joining me if you've joined me. If you were going to the event that I very carefully scheduled and put up a bonny picture for, I might not be there. I think I fucked that up, if I'm perfectly honest. But let's see what we've got to see today. So I'm going to answer this question very simply and quickly. This is most unlike me. Oh, and here I am up in the corner. How exciting. Haven't done this before, it's all new. Think I'm Archie. A garden room is a building in your garden that is suitable for year-round use. Mic drop, the end. Done. I'm going to say it again, even though you can read. A garden room is a building in your garden that is suitable for year-round use. Now, when I'm talking about year-round use, I want to make absolutely certain that we're clear about what we're expecting from that. So, if you cannot comfortably use the building all year round, it is not a garden room. Even if the website that you bought it from calls it a garden room. Even if the salesperson you spoke to calls it a garden room. Even if everybody else in your life refers to it as a garden room, if you can't comfortably use it all year round, it's not a garden room. Simple as that. Now, comfortable means it shouldn't be freezing cold in the winter. If you've got a wee heater in there, just like you would put in a room in your house that was chilly, it'll be nice and comfortable. You'll be able to work in there or sit in there or do whatever you want in there without having to wear one of those crazy suits made out of sleeping bags. I do quite like that sort of affair. I love being cosy. It also means that in the summer, it shouldn't be absolutely stifling and super uncomfortable to sit down in that building. It means that it shouldn't be mouldy. It shouldn't be damp. It shouldn't smell weird. It shouldn't feel like a big plastic box. Some garden rooms are indeed big plastic boxes. You shouldn't open it and go, oh, it's so musty in here, I don't even want to be in this space. A garden room should be comfortable year round. December to January, summer, spring, autumn, winter. I don't know any other ways to say it. Comfortable year round. And if it's not comfortable year round, maybe you didn't buy a garden room. Maybe you bought something else that somebody called a garden room. And believe me, that this happens all the time. We'll see some examples of this as we go on. So today, to keep myself right and to stop myself from blethering on for hours and hours, I've got this wee slideshow affair. It does mean extra buttons to press, so I am a bit terrified it could go wrong. But you should be able to see these on screen, and they should be here for you to look back at if you've got any questions. But remember, questions are my favourite. I love questions. I'd very much like to get some questions to answer. Like genuinely, see when it happens, it's going to be the absolute thrill of my life. And if you have got questions, the reason that I started today, right at the bottom, what is a garden room, was to demonstrate to you that there's no such thing as a stupid question. That's, you know, it's a sort of an old-fashioned cliche. And people like to say, oh, you want to see a stupid question? Hold my beer. However, there really is no such thing as a stupid question. If you want to know something about the process of shopping for, buying, using a garden room, or even a building that's not a garden room but has been sold to you as a garden room, that's absolutely fine. Fire those questions in, I'll get them, and then I'll answer them. So far, I've done a lot of asking for questions, not very much answering of questions, because I need you to help me out with this. And I'm literally here to help you find the answers to your questions. I'm Amy, I'm the marketing manager here at Gillis & Mackay, and there's nothing I like more than knowing the answer to somebody's question. So, let's get cracking. Okie doke. So by the end of this live, you are going to know how to determine what type of building is suitable for your purposes, know what features to look for in a building specification, and you're going to see some clear examples of garden rooms and other types of garden buildings that may or may not be garden rooms. It's a bit of a minefield out there, and you will probably still have questions by the end of this information. Again, the questions, remember, I am desperate to answer your questions. Don't leave me hanging like this. It's like, I'm going a little bit crazy here asking for questions. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to tell you a terrible secret. It is a source of great shame. Well, is it a source of great shame? We'll see how that's going at the moment. We'll see how that's going in a minute, excuse me. My terrible secret is that this quite shabby, fairly shite shed that you can currently see on your screen is mine. It lives in my back garden. And if you're thinking, oh, but you work for Gillis & Mackay, they sell the Rolls Royce of sheds. How can you be dealing with such a terrible building sitting in your garden? Well, the reason that I chose to show you this shed today, it's for a very good reason. It's because I wanted to let you see that everybody's choice of garden building is different. And the important thing is that you get it right for you. So let me tell you about my shite shed. My shite shed was there when we moved into the house 10 years ago. And we thought, oh, handy, there's a shed. That's fine. And inside this shed, there is a lawnmower, some gardening tools, flower pots. There's a hose, I think. Not sure, the hose might not be in there anymore. There's a couple of cartons of weed killer, stuff like that. Now, I should point out, me and my husband, we are not gardeners. We maintain the grass and we pull up the weeds occasionally. Our neighbours would probably say not very often. But we do that from time to time when we feel like we have to. We don't particularly enjoy gardening and we don't have particularly brilliant garden tools. So, for our purposes, this shabby shitty shed, it's actually not terrible. And you know, I do work for Gillis & Mackay. I know where to buy a good shed if I want a good shed. But it's never been a priority for me. So I'm probably not a person who needs much more from a shed than what I've got. So if that's the case, if I'm quite happy with it being not very brilliant, it's a wee bit rotted at the bottom. It's definitely not particularly secure, but it's fine. It does what it does. And there's nothing in there that I'm super worried about getting damp or getting mouldy or, getting dusty or having beasties on it. So what I've got there might not be what you would choose, but actually it suits me fine. And I will probably replace it at some point, but at the moment, as I say, it's not a priority. On the other hand, you might have plans for your garden. You might be looking for something very particular. And if that's the case, you should be able to get that. Within reason, within the realms of your budget, you should be able to get that. So here's the really important thing to determine before you start even planning this project. And it sounds simple, but people don't always think about this. What are you going to use the building for? If you want a space that you are going to be in 24/7, if you're going to practically live there, if you want it to be heated, ventilated, if you want it to have a shower in it, if you want to live in there, then those are your demands, those are your requirements for that building. If you want a garden room or a garden building that you're going to enjoy by sitting out in the summer and you're quite happy to just choose it when it's sunny, That's another set of requirements. They're different. And the two buildings that you need and the budgets for those buildings are completely different. So first you need to decide what you need. You also need to decide what you don't need. So for example, I don't need a tricked out 3-tier workshop, top of the range, Gillis and Mackay, super duper amazing building, because all I'm doing is keeping some crappy old tools that I'm not really bothered about. If I wanted to keep, I don't know, a record player in there with all my classic vinyl collection that are alphabetised and stored in crates and kept in the cellophane, I wouldn't put them in that shed. That would be crazy. So you need to know what you want and you need to know what you don't want. What are you actually going to use the building for? And if you're a person who's ever been in to see our sales team for a consultation, this is one of the first questions that they'll ask you when you come in and say whatever kind of building you want. And people sometimes come in for a consultation for a building type and end up with a different building type because they say, I really want to be able to do this thing. And the sales team will say, oh, well, actually, you're maybe looking for this instead. So what you're going to use the building for, what you're not going to use the building for. And lastly, maybe you're thinking this should come first, but actually you need to consider the other two before you say, how much money are you going to spend on this project? If you are like, I've just retired, I'm going to go all out, it's a treat to myself, I'm going to enjoy my garden for the rest of my days, maybe you're looking at a different budget to somebody who's saying, oh, my garden's only wee, we're probably not going to live here for like forever, but it would be really good to have somewhere to sit in the garden and, you know, have a wee gin and fizz and enjoy ourselves. So how much money you need to spend, what you're going to use the building for, and what you don't need from the building. Those are your important questions to ask first. Next, you would go and maybe start looking at your options. Now, here are some garden building options. This is not an exhaustive list. There are some here that I deliberately chose not to talk about today, just because I didn't want to be here for 5 hours. Nobody's going to watch that. But from the top, so we've got sheds, summer houses, gazebos, pergolas, greenhouses, conservatories, log cabins, and at the bottom of the list, the one you came here to hear about, garden rooms. Very, very quickly, I'm just going to zip through these different building types. I'm going to tell you whether they are or are not garden rooms. I'm going to tell you what you can expect from these buildings, and you can decide then, is this something that I need? So let's start off. The shed is the single-skinned OG. Now that's a term I'm going to use several times today, so it's probably worthwhile defining that term. This is a Gillis and Mackay shed. Other sheds are available from other retailers. You can go into a shop like B&Q and buy one off the shelf. You can have them custom made by a small manufacturer like our sheds. They range in price from about £300 to about £12,000, depending on where you buy it, what you want, the model, the specification, all that sort of stuff. Not getting into the weeds of sheds today. I could talk about sheds for a long time, but we're here to talk about garden rooms. What you need to know about a shed is that it's single-skinned. Say that again, single-skinned. That means that the wall is comprised of one single layer of timber. That's all. The inside and the outside are the front and the back of the cladding that's been used to make up the walls. Okay? Now a shed is generally used for storage. You might use it to work in if it's big enough, you know, if you're a woodworker, for example, if you've got a hobby. And crucially, if you're not that bothered about being a bit uncomfortable in the weather, because sheds get really warm inside. At the moment, ours are absolutely toasty, and they get really cold because of that single skin of timber. Timber's a good insulator, but this is Scotland, you know, it does get cold and it does get warm now and again. So if you don't mind a building that's going to change temperature as the weather changes, you're using it for storage, shed is absolutely fine, tip top. We love sheds. Moving on. Now, single-skinned, that term that I just used there, this is a really good example. This is not one of our buildings. This is actually from a company called Balmuir Sheds. They're based in Dundee. They make a decent shed if that's what you're looking for. They also make summer houses. Now, this is a good example of a summer house because you can see that it's a single-skinned building. And you can see that because on the inside of the building in this picture, you've got the vertical lines of the studs, of the framing of the building. They're visible. And this is a clear sign that the building is single-skinned. So the manufacturer of this building has made a frame out of timber. They have fixed the weatherboard planks to the frame to make a panel, or they've done it on however they do it. And you can see the framing there in the picture. and you can see the back side of the timber on the inside of the building. And if the photo was taken from a different angle, you'd see the front side of the timber on the outside of the building. Essentially, this is the same as a shed. And the description I've given here, sometimes people used to be a bit snooty when we sold summer houses. All that money for a shed with windows. Well, if that's what you want, then that's what you pay for. Summer houses take considerably more skill to build than a shed does, so they cost a bit more, and that makes good sense. Now, you'll also see in the picture here, the priority to windows of this building are windows. So generally speaking, a summer house is a single skin building. It's for seasonal use. You'll sit in there in the summer and enjoy yourself. Probably wouldn't do that in the winter because it'll be really cold. Lots of windows to let the sun in, which also means lots of windows to let the cold in the winter. Summer houses are seasonal buildings, and that's one of the reasons why we don't build them anymore. We wanted people to be able to have year-round buildings. So a summer house, a shed with windows, if you want to call it like that, that's an accurate description. I'm not in any way being snooty about it. As I say, it's a single skin building. It usually has a lot of windows. I see here that Balmuir use timber doors and windows, very common in a summer house. And one thing to be aware of, we still encounter this. Summer house doors that are made of timber will shrink and swell according to the weather. So depending on how hot and how dry it is, or how cold and how wet it is. So if you've got a summer house and you only use it for 6 weeks in the summer, and you have to go into it in the winter, you might find your doors a wee bit stuck. That's something that is part and parcel of dealing with a single skin building that's for seasonal use, and specifically that has timber doors and or windows. So the windows, you might experience the same thing. So if that's fine, if that's what you're after, great. There are millions of summer houses out there. Perfect. You can easily find a summer house that fits this sort of description. You can even go to Balmuir if you want it. This is not a review piece. This is not me saying I would or I wouldn't buy X, Y, or Z from X, Y, and Z company. These are just pictures to demonstrate and give examples of the building types that I'm talking about. So, moving on. Next we've got, I always call them gazebos because I think I'm funny, the gazebo, which is essentially it's a roof without any walls. And you can tell straight away, this is a very different type of structure. Yes, you would put it in your garden, but it's either for shade in the summer or it's for shelter from the rain. And that's that pretty much. There's not much more to say about it. Gazebos they're pretty features to have in your garden. In fact, we've got one in our show area. We do occasionally build gazebos, and they're very beautiful, but they're not buildings. They don't have walls. They don't enclose a space. If somebody's out there trying to tell you that a gazebo is a garden room, get out of there, man. They're crazy. So fancy roof. This one's got nice shingles. Ours also have shingles. So pretty sturdy. Great for shelter from the rain. Great from shade from the sun, but not technically speaking a building. Okay, the pal of the gazebo, the pergola. This is, I've said here, roof optional. Essentially, it's a gazebo minus the roof. So sometimes pergolas will have temporary, like sort of movable roof coverings, like there might be fabric coverings, or sometimes they have metal coverings, but I'd call it a gazebo if the roof was fixed. The other thing that people often do with pergolas is they use them as a trellis to grow plants. So you might have roses or climbers on the roof part, and that is what creates the shade in the summer. Again, uber seasonal. You're not going to sit out underneath your pergola in the middle of February when the rain is coming in your ear hole. But in the summer, it's a really lovely way to split up the space in your garden and create a bit of landscaping. And also, if it's got a detachable roof, you might be able to use it for shade. It would shelter you from some light rain, but not much more than that. Pergolas are really more about the decorative use of space. Okay, greenhouse, and as the caption says, this one's for the gardeners, and the picture that I found here is the greenhouse is full of plants. Very obvious here, a greenhouse isn't a garden room because it's usually going to be full of plants. That's generally what people use them for. You buy a greenhouse because it's made of glass or polycarbonate, and you fill it up with plants that need extra sunlight, lots of sunlight and lots of heat. So they're designed to get as warm as possible inside. Probably not that comfortable if you want to sit in there and have a cup of tea when it's blazing sunshine like it is today. Maybe a slightly nicer place to stop off from your weeding if it's November and it's a wee bit chilly outside. Maybe the sun's hitting the panes and it's gotten a wee bit warmer, but it's certainly not a place that you're going to use as a home office, for example. It's not somewhere that you're going to spend all day. A greenhouse is, generally speaking, for the plants. Yeah, that's about it, I think, for the greenhouses. Next, we've got a conservatory. Now, the example that I've got here maybe doesn't look like other conservatories that you've seen, but I did want to make the point that while I've described it here as a glass extension, sometimes they're made out of glass and brick, like this one is. Sometimes they're made entirely from glass. Now, the key thing to point out, we answer this question a lot. A conservatory is a structure that is joined on to the existing building. So in this photograph, you don't see the house that it's joined to, but if you look through to those double doors, the white doors that you can see inside, they're attached to the house that this conservatory is part of. So it's obviously the high amount of windows, you know, sometimes they're entirely made from glass. It's a room to trap the sun. It's a room to stay nice and cosy when it's sunny outside and to make the most of that, even if it's not particularly warm outside. The other thing about conservatories, similar to a greenhouse actually, is they can overheat quite easily. This is why brick and glass is quite a nice compromise. But and they tend to get a bit cold in the winter unless you're heating them. However, the main thing I would say about a conservatory is it's joined on to your home. I wouldn't call a conservatory a garden room. Sometimes people do use that term. They're also sometimes called sunrooms or solariums or orangeries, although there are some slight differences between that. I'm not going to, again, get into the weeds of that. We're here to talk about garden rooms, but conservatory is definitely well worth mentioning. As a quick note, sometimes you can build a conservatory with permitted development. You don't always need planning permission. People are not always aware of that. They think it only applies to sheds and garden rooms, but it's a useful thing to know. Okay, now I've got a few things to say. I was laughing yesterday talking to Sophie. It sounds like I've got it in for log cabins at the moment. I don't have it in for log cabins, but I want people to know what they're buying. So my caption here says, a log cabin is single-skinned and scurrilous. I do enjoy the word scurrilous. Log cabins are scurrilous because they look like they're going to outperform the average single-skinned building. And they don't. Very straightforward. Now, what people often like about log cabins is they have extremely thick timber walls. If I recall correctly, the photograph that I'm showing you here, I believe the walls are 44 mils thick, okay? So significantly thicker than the sort of weatherboard cladding that you saw in the shed or the summer house example that I showed you. So people look at that and they think, oh, 44 mils, that's pretty thick. That's going to be a good solid structure. The other thing that I really don't enjoy about most garden room marketing, if you go onto a website and look for log cabin marketing, is you go onto a website of a log cabin supplier. They're almost always suppliers. That's maybe a chat for another day. I was thinking about this. Supplier versus manufacturer is an important distinction to draw. Log cabins are almost always suppliers. They are generally made out of spruce, which is whitewood, and they are generally imported from Europe. Now, this particular kind of log cabin that you're looking at just now, this is an interlocking log cabin. And the buildings that I'm talking about, thick walls, imported from Europe generally, and mass-produced by suppliers, these are generally interlocking log cabins. And you can see whether or not a building's an interlocking log cabin by looking at the corners. So, can you see oh, you can see my gigantic cursor. So this feature here that you see at the end, this is where the planks that make up the walls have interlocked. That's where the name comes from. Now, interlocking log cabins, regardless of how thick the timbers are still single-skinned buildings. Same as a shed, same as a summer house. Another thing about log cabins, not this one looks like it's got timber doors and windows, which means it's susceptible to the same problems as a summer house, especially if you only use it seasonally. Log cabins are single-skinned. They sometimes come with double glazed windows. And again, people think, oh great, double glazing, that'll really keep the heat in. However, what happens to timber when it gets wet? Timber, when it gets wet, takes in the water to some extent, sometimes quite a lot, sometimes not so much, depending on the variety of timber being used. And then it dries. And often when it dries, it changes shape. It doesn't dry consistently. So it might twist a little bit, it might warp a wee bit, it might cup. And all of these shape changes matter. So if you look at the log cabin photograph here and you think about, like, let's say that randomly the 5th plank up from the bottom gets really badly twisted after it gets wet. Does that impact the 4th and the 6th? Yeah, of course it does. This building is like a big old jigsaw puzzle. Every piece interlocks with other pieces. So when those pieces start to change shape, it undermines the structural integrity of the building. If that's okay, if you know that, and you're still happy to buy a log cabin, perfect. However, these buildings are often marketed as garden rooms, and they're not garden rooms. They're not garden rooms, A, because they are single-skinned and susceptible to shape change. B, they are not insulated buildings. The only way to insulate a log cabin, because it's single-skinned, is to essentially build a second structure inside. Now, that's a reasonable way to solve the problem of it being single-skinned, but it also is quite an expensive way to solve that problem. You're essentially having to buy 2 buildings. You'd probably need a joiner to do it. Also, I don't know what the results would be like. I've never seen a successfully insulated log cabin. They're uninsulated buildings. So, if you've got a heater in there, which, you know, I'm not suggesting that any of these buildings perform in the winter without a heater, but if you've got a heater in there, you're going to spend a lot of money on your electric bill, because the timber windows, the timber doors, the movement in the timber itself, you're talking about gaps and shape changes and drafts and all sorts of places for the water to get in and the cold to get in. So you're heating a building that's letting the air in, essentially. Now, again, I'm not dissing log cabins. I'm saying here are the reasonable expectations you can have from a log cabin building. Gaps around your UPVC windows? Yeah, that's to be expected. Shape change. Mould inside the building over long periods of time? Absolutely. Shape change means water can get in. It's going to be cold in there? Of course, it's not an insulated building. So bearing all of these things in mind, it may not be suitable for year-round use. I'd say probably not suitable for year-round use. And therefore, regardless of what the website says, I'm talking about, all the big suppliers, Dunster House, Tiger, Log Cabins Scotland, there's all sorts of places, all sorts of websites out there who will have the option in their menu, garden room, and when you get there, you'll be seeing pictures like this. So now you know better. You've been sheducated, you can say, that's not a garden room, that's actually an interlocking log cabin, and they're not the same, because a garden room is a year-round building and an interlocking log cabin is not. So, if you are looking at a log cabin and you're not aware of these things, have a quick look. Again, if you've got a specific question, let me know. Very easy for me to answer a question about log cabins. Done loads of research into these buildings. If you're a person out there who's got a log cabin and you're thinking, oh yeah, this is exactly what happened to me. I bought a log cabin and I thought it was going to be great, and 5 years later it's more bother than it was worth. Please let me know. I'd absolutely love to come and take some pictures and make some videos of your building, because we want to make sure that people know exactly what they're getting from their buildings. So if you've got a log cabin and it's fallen down, I'd like to be able to show that to people. Not because log cabins are rubbish, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you need to know what to expect from a log cabin. And given that it's a single-skinned, uninsulated building, regardless of whether or not it's got double glazing, it's a big shed. It's a big shed with thick walls. So you can't expect it to perform like an insulated, fully tricked out garden room. That's not fair. It's not fair to you, and it's not fair to the people selling these buildings, which is why they should be more upfront about that. Okay, I'll get off my log cabin soapbox now, and we'll get on to the garden room. Now, again, if you've seen me talking about garden rooms before, if you've been online, if you've had a look, you will know that garden rooms are the entire gamut of cheap, cheerful, expensive, mass-produced, supplier, manufacturer, super expensive, incredibly beautiful, really crappy. They're everything. It's a term that encompasses an entire market, and the whole market is, it's crazy. There's so much variation out there. I've said this before, when I was a content writer here, I wanted to create a complete, comprehensive guide to buying a garden room, and I had to give it up because there's too much variation and too much choice to be able to say, here's a single choice that you can make. Instead, we have to talk about it in a bit more detail. These are nuanced conversations, and a quick headline or, you know, a quick blog post even is not necessarily going to cut that. So this is our year-round hero. Now it is worth saying, again, that our definition of a garden room as a year-round building that you can use comfortably whatever the season is our definition. That's not necessarily how that definition is applied by everyone who's selling a garden room. People will sell you log cabins and call them garden rooms. People will sell you uninsulated buildings and call them garden rooms. There's no sort of rules about what a garden room is or isn't. So I'm going to take you through why we define a garden room the way that we do. Now, the building that you're looking at here is one of two garden room types that we build. This is a radiata garden room. We also make blackstone garden rooms, and they're different in price, they're different in specification, and they're different in scope. So again, we need to make sure that people know what they're getting. But this building right here, our radiata garden rooms, these are suitable for year-round use. You can sit in them and do your crossword. You can use them for a home office. You can put the kids out there to play. You could, in a pinch, spend a couple of nights sleeping in it. I wouldn't say that would be particularly comfortable. However, it's possible for short-term use. If you wanted a garden room that you were going to permanently house somebody in, you'd need a more upgraded specification. But these buildings are suitable for year-round use, unless you want to actually live in them. So, here's some things that you need to look for if you're out there in the wild world, need my teeth in for that, of buying a garden room, or even just browsing for them online. So if you want a year-round building, first of all, you need to think about the wall structure. It's just like an onion, love a wee Shrek reference. You need layers. If it is a single-skinned building, it will not be comfortable all year round. Simple as that, facts. So, a couple of things to point out. As I've just said when I was talking about log cabins, wall thickness isn't as important as wall structure. Now, obviously the thickness of the wall, if you're looking at layers, would tend to suggest that there are multiple layers. I'm the sort of really annoying person who says, what's inside that wall? What are those layers? How are they made up? How does it work? Now, that's a really complicated question, and probably the best person to answer questions like that are like architects and structural engineers, and I am neither of those things. But at the very bare minimum, you want to see that there's more than one layer to your wall, okay? If you want to keep the weather out, and if you're looking to use it year round, if you want the temperature control. So even if the wall's 44, 60 mils thick, if it's a single layer of timber, that's no good. If the wall is 60 mil thick because it's got outer cladding, it's got a cavity gap, it's got insulation, it's got lining, no problem. So structure is much more important than thickness. You need to ask questions. It's not always there on websites. God, so many times I've tried to write a review of a company only to find that they just don't tell you. And that is really frustrating. But you should be able to ask those questions and get good answers from any salesperson, from any website. Yeah, it's annoying if you have to make the extra step to ask that question, but that's how it is right now. Is there a cavity? This is a really good shorthand. It's not absolutely foolproof, I will say that. It's a good place to start. There are cavity buildings that are still not going to be garden rooms. For example, you can buy garden rooms that are made of double aluminium walls with an air cavity in between them. Now, given that aluminium, I think aluminium, I immediately think a drinks can. Am I a lush? Who knows? Let's not get into that. Drinks cans are designed so that you can make a drink cold really easily. And metal buildings, they are also, whether intentionally or not, they are a great place to let cold in and heat out. So, no, other way around. It lets all of them in. So even though there's a cavity between those two layers, if the two layers are made out of metal, your building's not going to be usable year round. It's going to be freezing in the winter and absolutely boiling in the summer. So a cavity combined with layers is a good place to start if you're looking for a good quality year-round garden room. Again, I wish it was as simple as saying if there's a cavity it'll be good. Alas, it's complicated. Can the building breathe? So this is part of the benefit that the cavity brings. I talked earlier about big plastic boxes. This is my slightly snidey shorthand for composite buildings. Composite cladding is very common for garden rooms, and sometimes it's more expensive than timber. Now, ages and ages ago, I wrote a blog post about garden rooms with composite cladding, and my question was, would I buy one? And my answer was no, because it wasn't possible for me at that time to get a really good handle on what was good composite and what was not so good composite. So what you'll hear about composite is it's low maintenance, it's long lasting, it doesn't need painted, etc. What you won't hear about composite is there's cement cladding, there's polymer cladding, there's cladding that uses higher percentages of wood versus resin, there's cladding that uses higher percentages of resin versus wood. It's one of these things again, it's very complicated. We don't use composite because over time composite can come apart. Timber doesn't do that, especially not if it's treated timber. So the other thing about composite, because there is generally a resin component, they always call it resin. Do you know what resin is? It's plastic. It's a plastic polymer that's mixed with usually wood fibre, sometimes cement fibre, sometimes other materials. But if the main part of your building is plastic resin, the building isn't going to be terribly breathable. It's going to get musty inside, it's going to need a lot of ventilation, otherwise it'll seem a bit airless. So the cavity, depending again on the structure of the wall, that can help with that, but really the best way would be to get and see a building like that. It's not always easy to do that, because if they're in show areas and they're sitting empty, you don't really have a good idea of how they perform. Ideally, everybody would know a pal who's got a log cabin and they've got a composite garden room and they've got a timber garden room, and they could go and decide which one they like best, because a lot of it does just come down to preference. But when it comes to looking for a year-round building, cavity, wall structure and breathability are important. Lastly on my list for wall structure is beware of U values. Oh, this rips my knitting, man, it really does. U values are, again, this is a term used largely by architects, by structural engineers, by physicists. It is a way to measure how resistant a material is to heat. And if you're building a house, a real life, people are going to live there for the rest of their lives house, then there are rules, there's legislation about how, what the U values for that building should be. Because building regulations make sure that people don't just put up crappy houses and call them habitable. So if you're building a house, a habitation for full-time use, it's got to be under a certain U value. Now, U values are, the lower the U value is, the better, as in the less permeable to heat the material is. However, U values are really complex, and if you want to calculate the U value of a building, an entire building, you need to take into account the U value of every single material used, the thickness of every single material used, the individual design of the building, so how much of it is studs, how much of it is cladding, how much of it is insulation. You need to look at the roof and the floor. You need to consider how the building has been constructed. Are there any gaps? Is it square? Has there been any movement, etc.? U values they're not just paper exercises, as in they're not important. They are important. But if you're looking at a listing for a garden room and it's saying it's got a U value of X, but it's also saying that you have to build it yourself, then that U value is no use to you. If it's saying that it's got such and such an insulation and the insulation has an extremely low U value, that's not particularly useful information either, because you'd still need to know how much insulation is being used, in which context is it being used. Sometimes insulation needs a particular size of air cavity to be effective. Sometimes it's suitable for indoor use but not outdoor use, etc. U values are far too complicated to base a decision on in isolation. So if that's the main selling point of a building listing, I am immediately suspicious, because they don't have enough information, generally speaking, to accurately be able to say this entire building, once constructed, has this particular U value. I would also say there are lots of companies building garden rooms who also build houses. You know, it's a very common kind of sideline for construction companies to have. They might have calculated U values for their garden rooms, but you should also still make sure that they're the ones installing them. And ask them questions about that wall structure. Those guys should definitely be able to answer those questions. They've had an architect on board, they've had an engineer on board, they're looking at ratings, they're looking at building regulations, so they should be able to answer those questions. U values by themselves in isolation, no, false flag. Don't like it, don't enjoy it, it's not helpful. U values in the context of an architect specification, a structural engineer's warrant, great. I'm not saying U values are no use for anything, but in the context of garden rooms, particularly online garden room sales, they are totally misleading. Okay, next, insulation. What a minefield, as I've just said. So, insulation can be loosely split into 3 types. Loosely. I'm sure somebody's going to contradict me and say, no, that's not actually true. We use foil back insulation in our radiata garden rooms, and we use, I'm never sure how to say it, knauf, the sort of rock wool type insulation in our Blackstone garden rooms. And the type of insulation that you use and the thickness of insulation that you use, they're kind of 2 separate deals. So foil back is generally compressed, so you can use a thinner amount and get, increase those U values if you're talking in those things. Rock wool is generally quite thick, but also it can be compressed, although it's not always useful to do that. Sometimes you need an air gap. Again, ask the questions. I looked at the specification recently of a garden room that used foil back insulation, and my immediate response to that was, what a load of shite. To be honest, I had a look, I didn't know much about foil back insulation, and I went and had a look at it. It's very complex. It needs, for example, that's the insulation that needs a specific size of wall cavity to perform. Otherwise, it is kind of just tin foil. Some of it looks like metal bubble wrap. Some of it looks like kind of layers of fabric type material interspersed with metallic materials. I'm by no means an expert on it, and the applications for it are complicated, probably out of my scope. But again, the specification that I looked at was like, we've got this amazing foil back insulation, but then it also offered optional PIR, the foam board insulation, for more money. You're like, so is the first insulation rubbish then? Is that why you can also offer a second? And if PIR is your upgrade, why aren't you using PIR throughout the building? Wouldn't that make better sense? So maybe I'm just incredibly suspicious. I am totally incredibly suspicious, because there's a lot of bullshit out there, quite simply. So looking at insulation and going, oh, it's got 35mm insulation, that sounds pretty thick to me, that'll be brilliant, that's a good building, year-round use. Not necessarily. It's an absolute minefield. Again, I'm asking here, is there a cavity? Insulation placed directly onto particularly timber cladding, it's not a good idea. It's a really great way to help your timber rot prematurely. So if there's insulation in there, there should be a cavity at some point and in some way. SIPs are a different story. That's a whole other topic. We'll talk about that another day. Again, can the building breathe? When I was talking before about U values and I was talking about breathability, it popped into my head that there's a whole movement just now building structures called passive houses. And passive houses are designed to be as non-breathable as possible. They are deliberately designed to keep all the air and therefore all the heat inside the building. And that's great, except what sometimes isn't mentioned is a true passive house, because it's incredibly energy efficient, needs a ventilation system, because otherwise everything that gets into the building stays exactly there. Smells, heat, moisture, all of it. So a true passive house will have an installed ventilation system within the building that will run alongside the sort of very energy efficient materials, because the builders know that otherwise that's going to be a completely airless building. So if your building is so super duper insulated that it's completely non-breathable, you're going to have to ventilate that building. Now, in a small structure like a garden room, it's probably overkill to install a custom ventilation system. But you're going to have the windows and doors open quite a lot of the time. So if you're going to have to do that in December, is that a year-round building? Do you really want to put a heater on just to open all the windows and the doors? Again, this is a complex topic. We could probably talk about this for a whole hour. I'm not going to do that today. But breathability is important. in the context of insulation. And finding that balance between I want to keep the heat in, but I don't want the building to be an airless cube, is really tricky. The last thing to look for when you're looking for insulation in terms of whether or not a garden room will be a year-round building, the roof, the walls and the floor. Don't be thinking, oh, the walls are insulated, that'll be fine. Heat loves to escape, generally what it tries to do. So if the roof isn't insulated and you've got a heater in there, that heat is just going straight out the roof. If the floor isn't insulated, likewise. So roof, walls and floor should all be insulated. Okay, oh, bases. Another thing I could talk about forever. We were just laughing that you've been working here a while when you look at a picture of a concrete base and go, oh, that's a cracker. But firm foundations are an absolute must. Even the best buildings need a good base. So if the garden room log cabin, whatever it is that you're looking at online, is like, yeah, chuck it on the grass, put it on a plastic frame, it'll be fine. I'm concerned straight away. What's it going on? If you put it on your lawn on a plastic frame, it's still a big, heavy chunk of timber. It's going to sink over time. It's going to cause shape changes. What's the drainage going to be like if it rains? There's all sorts of questions. So if you've got a company that isn't talking about base requirements, I don't think that's great, basically. Optimum performance. We guarantee our buildings for 30 years, and one of the reasons that we're able to do that is we are extremely picky about what bases our buildings go on to. It's the only way we can guarantee them for that length of time, because even if the buildings were absolutely amazing, top-notch, perfect, if you put them on an inferior base, there's going to be problems. Okay, I am getting to the end, I promise. This is loads. Self-assembled or installed. I touched on this earlier when I was talking about the old U-values trap. If you're a joiner, great, build a garden room, awesome. One of my friends, his dad built a beautiful garden room in their garden down in Whitehaven in Cumbria. It's an absolute cracker and he knew what he was doing. If you're like somebody like me, I work with joiners, but I don't do a whole lot of joinery. Maybe you think you've got the skills to build a garden room? I'll be honest with you. I spent the weekend installing a loft ladder in my loft. I bought it from a company that had what I thought were extremely comprehensive instructions because I knew I was going to be fitting it, so I wanted to make sure it wasn't going to be a nightmare. So I'd read the instructions many times, I'd got all my equipment set up, I thought I knew what I was doing. It was an absolute nightmare. I hate the instructions, it's terrible. I still haven't finished it yet. So it's very easy to take on a project that seems like you can probably muddle your way through it and then find halfway through that it's actually totally out with your skills and your scope. It's really easy to do that. Those buildings will be at the lower end of the kind of budget scale. Again, if you know you've got the skills, or you've got a pal or a father-in-law or a sister or whoever it is that's out there can help you build that building, maybe that is somewhere that you can save a bit of money. However, it needs to be square, it needs to be assembled correctly, because if those things aren't in place, that's going to affect the performance of the building. So if you're thinking it's just a wee cheapy thing, it'll last for 5 years, I'll put it up myself, great. Accurate expectations, remember? But if you want that building to be there for 20 odd years and to be absolutely perfect for all that time, maybe self-assembly isn't a great idea, unless you happen to be qualified to put that building up. Okay, again, I could talk about this for ages. The major difference between buying from a supplier or a manufacturer is it puts a face to the building. So suppliers tend to provide mass-produced generic buildings at a cheaper price point. In fact, when I was looking for a picture of a summer house earlier on, the picture that I used from Balmuir, now obviously Google is specific to a location and it's specific to the question that you use and the terms that you use, but there's not many people in this part of the world building, manufacturing bespoke summer houses. We used to do it, we don't do it anymore. Balmuir still do it. They were the only people that I could see with, I mean, it wasn't the main focus of my research today. I might come back to that, but there's not many people out there manufacturing summer houses. The vast majority of Google hits that I saw were suppliers. They provide mass-produced generic buildings and they are cheaper, but if something goes wrong with them, you're going back to B&Q or Dunster House or The Range or wherever you can buy these buildings. And the very best outcome you can hope for at that point is you might get a replacement. Really extreme problem, you might get your money back, which isn't the end of the world, but it does mean you don't have a garden building anymore. It's a huge hassle. If you buy from a manufacturer and something goes wrong, the door needs adjusted, you've got a question about how to paint the building or whether or not you can add a deck without upsetting things or whatever else, you can contact the manufacturer directly, and if they are good, responsible manufacturers, they will help you address your problems. They might not do it for free, it'll depend on the terms of your guarantee, but they will be able to help you address those problems. So again, decide what you're looking for. If you are buying something quick and you're happy to deal with it yourself, supplier might well be the best way to go for you. If you want somebody to come back to, if you've got questions, if you want some recourse if there's any snags or problems, a manufacturer is a much better option. Okay, so we're getting close to the end. I said at the start that we would know how to determine what type of building is suitable for your purposes. That's the first thing you need to decide. What are your purposes? What do you want and what do you expect? Once you know that, you can start to match the building type to exactly what you need from the building. We went through some of the features to look for in a building specification. If you want year-round performance, you need layers. You need insulation. You need to ask questions about how that insulation's working. You need a good base. And ideally, you've got the level of service whereby you can come back to the maker, the supplier, whoever it is, if something goes wrong. And we looked at some examples of garden rooms, and we also looked at some examples of buildings that aren't garden rooms, even though sometimes people call them garden rooms. Yeah, bit of a bugbear. So, just to recap, just to very quickly finish off, a garden room is a year-round building, and that slide has a big old mistake on it, because those are the next 2 points from the last slide. Okay, I hope that, big picture, I hope that this has been informative. I hope that it has helped you to get a bit clearer on what you need from a building, what sort of performance you can expect from different building types, and that should help you to decide what your budget should be, how that's going to fit in with your plans. Like maybe you're saving for a garden room that's going to last forever. Great. Maybe you just need something now. Those are two different situations. We know that it's complicated. We know that you will probably have a different situation to the next person to the next person. So please let us know. Oh, here she goes again with the questions. Ask me your questions. I am more than happy to answer them. There is no obligation. You're not going to get tied into like Gillis and Mackay life. If you just want to know, is this building all right? Here's what I want it for. I can answer that question very quickly, very easily. Yes, no, maybe. And if I don't know, I'll find out, because I hate not knowing the answer. So please send me your questions. You can put them in the comments of this video. You can email them to us. You can even pick up the phone. I keep saying this, go old school. Pick up the phone and say, is Amy there? I'd really like to ask her a question about a garden room. No problem. That's my job. That's what I'm here to do. I'm not here to tell you lies about our buildings. It's exactly the opposite. I'm here to tell you the truth about what we do, give you my take on what other people are doing so that you can make the best decision for your garden, whether that's a shed, a pergola, a garden room, or whatever else you've got up your sleeve. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you another time. Cool. Bye bye for now.